You see how this thing works? You see how symbolism works? You see the excitement and the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy. This is the thing that just... You ask me why I'm like this? Hypocrites? I'm allergic to them. Let me give you a little bit of history.
Me too.
This is something I want to put into your... And I'm not one of these, lapsed Catholics, anti-Catholics. There's Catholicism and there's the Vatican. There's Catholicism, the theology, not the doxy, it's the wrong term in particular, but there's the catechism and the theology and, all of that. And then there's the Pope. And this week, they made such a big stink over the fact, did the Pope mean there's no hell? Did he say there's no hell? Did he? Wait a minute, aren't you following the word of God, the word of Jesus, the Gospels, because it makes sense? Did they say, now listen, the only reason you're following this is because basically you will burn and incinerate forever in the lake of fire if you don't believe the name of Jesus. Praise God. Is that it? Hellfire, brimstone? I mean, did you? They actually, this was a discussion this week. Meanwhile, the institution of child abuse, not just in the Catholic Church, I'm not going to be one of those people who just throws it all, but child abuse everywhere.
Old Lionel, ain't he a hoot? Hey, Rick South here, half hillbilly, half scholar, a member of the hoi polloi trailer trash, high-class trailer trash, that is. Now listen, this video is not monetized. I don't have a club you can join. Don't send me any money. Let's see, what else? I don't belong to any religion or nothing. In fact, religion as you know it, as we know it, it's gonna go bye-bye. I'm looking forward to it. Hey, are you a hound dog for pertinent information? Me too. Yeah, me too. The things that matter most concern me in my thought-riddled nature. I know there's some more of you out there. And I'm rooting for you. I like a hot tub. It's good for an old man. It gets my joints all oiled up. You know what I'm talking about? I know you would. Hey, you ever wonder, I mean, even if you believe in God, sometimes you kind of wonder about it. Yeah, me too. That's why there's something called faith. And Jesus said it was way important. Abraham had faith. Yeah, he was a man who, he didn't need no religion to connect with God. He didn't need that. It was just him and God. And you know, if you've watched some of my other videos, we've talked about the fact that that's the way it's going to be one of these days. God's going to throw a whole bunch of stuff in the trash can and everybody else is going to be like, hey. The Bible is an ancient book. It's the greatest book ever assembled. Name something that comes even close. It's had more influence over more people than any other book that's ever been written. And it has survived through some harrowing experiences. And some folks might ask, you know, how can you prove Abraham ever really existed and he's not just all made up? Well, how can you prove he didn't exist? The story of Abraham is one of the oldest stories about an individual that exists. Some folks might bring up the Epic of Gilgamesh, but But you can't prove that Gilgamesh ever existed either. So the way I look at it is I get what I can out of this man's life. And Abraham was a man of courage. Anyway, let's talk about Abraham. I don't know, 3,800, 4,000 years ago. The first man in the Bible to where they really at length get into his personal information is a fella. He started off being named Abram, but he ended up being called Abraham. Abram meant father. Abraham means father of nations. You know, three major world religions, you know, they all go back to this guy. There must have been something special about him. I mean, maybe some of you know about it, maybe some of you don't. But yeah, he was the first one that it gets personal. I mean, Noah, I mean, you got a little bit, and they name his kids and everything, but that's it. Well, he was an outsider. I mean, that's my opinion. He was he wasn't the first outsider, but evidently he was one of the, or if not the most important outsider. I mean, Jesus was the greatest outsider, don't get me wrong. But evidently there was something about this man that, you know, he didn't call himself a king, but you'd have thought he was a king by the way. Anyway, if you read all this information about him. And the Bible doesn't say everything that happened in this man's life. It just doesn't. But there's some other accounts that add to it. And, you know, some of them vary a little bit, but heck, how you're telling a story about a guy 4,000 years ago, and it's come down through all these translations and different, and it hadn't like, well, you know, you've all played that game where you whisper something in somebody's ear and it goes around and it comes back and it wasn't nothing like you started off with. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. We humans were that away. You know, and I'm just wondering, I bet he'd be ashamed of most of his ancestors, this father of nations. My God, they're fussing and fighting and killing each other, and they can't agree on nothing. And, you know, he was very intelligent. People loved him. This was a sagacious man. He possessed a lot of sagacity. And, you know, growing up, I just saw pictures of him. He looked like a mangy old desert dwelling, you know, barely got by kind of guy. No, it wasn't that way at all. He was a peacemaker. And on one recorded occasion, he was a badass, okay, when it came to warfare, and he had the right cause. You know this saying about one of you will slay 1,000 and two of you will slay 10,000? Well, Abraham. Yeah. Well, anyway, in case you didn't know anything about this man, well, I'm going to talk about him here a little bit. This is all from Chapter 2 of the Histories, Volume 1 of the Great and Distinguished Words of God. As I was saying, the book of Genesis doesn't cover all the details in Abraham's life. Now, one of the reasons why maybe it didn't was because there were other accounts existing at the same time that the book of Genesis was written down. Who knows? But anyway, there's a lot more information about Noah. He didn't mean to say Noah, he meant to say Abraham. In some of the other books, these are all some of the sources from Volume 1, the Histories. Now, the books that do are the Book of Jubilees, which they found pieces of in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of Jasher. There's Josephus' account. Now, Josephus is kind of special because he was close by Jerusalem. There, he was a Roman prisoner when the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. And so he got on pretty good with the Romans, and when they could see that the whole city was going to be destroyed, the Romans told Josephus to go in and save whatever he could out of the city. So what he did is he went in and got the books out of the temple library. I guess they were scrolls. And then later on, these were the sources he used for his Antiquities of the Jews. And then Philo of Alexandria and Pseudo-Philo also add some context to the story of Abraham. And then there's the Genesis Apocryphon. Now, the Bible starts talking about Abraham, and it doesn't have much to say about him until he leaves Ur of the Chaldees. God tells him to get up and leave that land, and he would show him a new land that he would give to him. But Abraham was 75 years old when that happened, and he lived another 100 years. So we'll talk about the birth of Abraham here. The book of Jasher tells the story here. Now, Abraham's father was Terah. Abraham was the 10th generation after Noah. And it tells the story here that the night that Abram was born, who would later become Abraham, that Terah was hosting some of the wise men of Nimrod. Nimrod was the king of that area still, and his conjurers, and they all ate and drank in his house. Well, when these people left, I'll just read it here. And when all the wise men and conjurers went out of the house of Terah, they lifted up their eyes toward heaven that night to take a look at the stars. And they saw, behold, one very large star came from the east and ran in the heavens. And it swallowed up the 4 stars from the 4 sides of heaven. And all the wise men of the king and his conjurers were astonished at the sight. And the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And they said to each other, this only betokens that the child that has been born to Terah this night will grow up and be fruitful and multiply and possess all the earth, he and his children forever. And he and his seed will slay great kings and inherit our lands. So, and the wise men and conjurers went home that night, and in the morning they all went up and went to Nimrod and told him what happened. So Nimrod, then he wants to kill Abram. So he summons Terah and tells him that he wants Abram, and he offers him all this money and stuff. And evidently Terah was a high-ranking official in Nimrod's government. Well, what Terah did is that he had a concubine that had a baby at the same time. And instead of taking Abram, he took this other baby, and Nimrod killed the baby. And then what happened then was Abram went to live with Noah and Shem, because they were still alive. In fact, they were going to live. Shem lived longer than Abraham did. After Shem didn't die till after Abraham did. And so I guess that's where Abram got his start, because another account here says that and there was not a man found in those days in the whole earth who knew the Lord, for they served each man his own God, except Noah and his household, and all those who were under his counsel knew the Lord in those days. A lot of people think that this Nimrod was the start of the world religion that got scattered all over the place. That's still in existence. You had the Mother of God, and they all had different names in the different cultures. So that's where Abraham got his start. Now, one of the proofs of this, that an ancient religion was started before the Tower of Babel incident, was that this same theme shows up all over the world, and just about every culture one can imagine. And here are some examples. In Babylon, it was Semiramis and Tammuz. This is the Queen of Heaven and the child, okay? The Catholics are still doing that. In Egypt, it was Isis and Osiris. In Asia, Cybele and Dionysus. The Romans, it was Fortuna and Jupiter. In Greece, it was Aphrodite and Adonis. In the land of Canaan, Astarte and Baal, or Ashtoreth and Molech. In India, it was Isi and Isawara. And it's even told that when the Jesuit missionaries first went to Tibet, China, and Japan, in those Oriental countries, they were astonished to find that even they had a counterpart for this Mother of Heaven and Holy Child deal. So it's pretty certain that that's where it got its start, was before all the language was confused. This cult was started. Still going on to this day. Now, the birth of Abraham is kind of mirrored by the birth of Moses and the birth of Jesus. There's some similarities here, some parallels. Okay, the celestial event. Well, go back and read the story about Moses. Okay, there was some people that back then that they were pretty smart. I mean, they might have been evil, they might have, but in the case of Moses, a deliverer was foretold, and word got around to Pharaoh. So what'd they do? Start killing babies. It started off with Abraham being the only baby, but it was another little baby that never got to live that got sacrificed in that deal. And then there was the birth of Jesus, okay? They're not exactly sure where these fellas came from, but it was east of Jerusalem, right? The Magi, they might have been Zoroastrians. And by the way, there's a little bit of Zoroaster in the little book. There was a celestial event, evidently, because they came up to Herod and went, "Hey, where's this new king guy?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" Go back and read the story if you don't remember the whole account. But anyway, there's some similarities there. And how many babies died because Herod wanted to kill Jesus? A bunch of them. Rachel weeping for her children. So Abraham spent many years with Noah and Shem. So he got his education from them, and I'm sure they taught him all they knew about God. And when he came back years later to stay with his dad, he's ran all this idol worshiping and stuff, all this crazy stuff going on. And he was alone in that regard. He was around all these other people that certainly didn't see it his way. So that took a lot of courage. And Abraham stood his ground. Now, in ancient times, they didn't have TV and all these magazines and all these distractions and such, all this entertainment. And Josephus talks about how the sons of Seth are the ones who more or less created the art of astrology and astronomy. Now, in our day, I believe that astrology's been corrupted, but God said that the stars would be for signs and for seasons, And so ancient man had a better knowledge of what was going on up there. If you remember the three wise men that found Jesus, you know, they saw his sign in the heavens. And so here's a little bit from the book of Jubilees about Abram. Abram sat up during the night on the first of the 7th month so that he might observe the stars from evening until daybreak, so that he might see what the nature of the year would be with respect to rain. And he was sitting alone and making observations. And a word came into his heart saying, all of the signs of the stars and the signs of the sun and the moon are all in the hand of the Lord. Why am I seeking? If he desires, he'll make it rain morning and evening. And if he desires, he will not send it down, and everything is in his hand. And he prayed on that night, saying, my God, the Most High, you alone are God to me, and you created everything, and everything which was the work of your hands. And you and your kingdom I have chosen. Save me from the hand of evil spirits, which rule over the thought of the heart of man, and do not let them lead me astray from following you, O my God, but establish me and my seed forever, and let us not go astray henceforth and forever. So Abraham was educated not only about the Lord, but about all this celestial stuff going on. Talking about Abraham here, the lost years. Now, there's several different accounts, stories about Abraham and his dad, Terah. And one thing that's constant in these stories is that Terah worshipped idols. In one account, he actually made them. In 2 accounts, actually 3 accounts, he had a whole room full of them, okay? And paid special attention to them. Now, one of the accounts has Abraham is fixing supper for Terah. And so he kindles a fire and kind of half-heartedly he cooks this stuff in this room full of idols. And that, you know, he tells one of these idols, you know, like, hey, watch over this food while I'm gone. Well, when he comes back, this idol had fallen into the fire and was burning up, but it was helping to cook supper. So anyway, he chuckled in himself about it, and then he went and took the food to his father. Well, and his father thanked him for that, but Abraham says, hey, don't thank me, thank that idol. He sacrificed himself so you could have your supper. Anyway, that kind of peeved his dad off, you know. Another one has it where Abraham goes into this room full of idols and smashes them all to smithereens except one. And then he puts this hammer or whatever he used to smash these idols, puts it in this other guy's hand, okay? So when his dad comes in and see all this stuff destroyed, you know, he gets mad, you know, and Abraham goes, well, they're gods, you know, this one guy didn't like them other guys, so he beat the crap out of them. Of course, that didn't fly too well. But anyway, it's in these lost years of Abraham that's not in the Bible. There's not kernels of truth, but maybe great big boulders of truth about what really went on. If you add up all these stories about Abraham's dad and the idols and stuff like that, it all amounts to something. How come around 300 people, I guess it was 300 men, and they had wives and kids and possessions and all this, but they followed Abraham. They left Ur of the Chaldees with him. I mean, this is an army. This is a population.
But this all starts in the book of Jasher. It talks about that, you know, this story about the room full of idols that his dad had. One of the accounts has him burning it down. Just about every one of them has it where Abraham's talking to his dad and going, how come you're doing this idol worship thing? You know, why don't you worship the God that made heaven and earth? But the Jasher story, you remember the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how they were thrown into the fiery furnace and all that stuff?
That story's in the book of Daniel.
Well, Jasher records where the same thing happened to Abraham. And that Abraham's dad finally just got so scared that he went and told Nimrod that, you know, Abraham burned down all these idols, or he smashed them all or something. And so the story goes that they threw Abraham into the brick kiln. Abraham must have really pissed them people off big time. And that he came out unscathed. And that, you know, I mean, if you do that to somebody, everybody's going to go, wow, this guy must be really something. And that after he came out of this furnace, that the king gave him a bunch of money, and everybody went, you know, don't mess with Abraham. and that he was so intelligent and so real that a bunch of people followed him. They went, Abraham, we're going with you. You know, there's a story later on about how Pharaoh gave one of his daughters to be a handmaid of Sarah. And he said, it's better to be a servant in this man's house to be a queen in Egypt. Wow. Yeah, he must have been a real something else kind of guy. So this army of people followed Abraham around, and you know, I guess you could call it a church. Now, several accounts about Abraham, it's something about people were trying to plant crops, and that there were so many crows that were coming that they'd eat up all the seeds. And that Abraham devised a way to drive the crows off at first, but then later on, Josephus says that Abraham invented a new kind of plow that as they plowed, it would plant the seeds and cover them up so the crows couldn't get them. He was a pretty smart cat, evidently.
God appeared to Abraham, spoke to him, and here's how it started. Abraham was praying, and here's what his prayer was. My God, the Most High, you alone are God to me, and you created everything, and everything which was in the work of your hands, and you and your kingdom I have chosen. Save me from the hand of evil spirits, which rule over the thought of the heart of man, and do not let them lead me astray from following you, O my God, but establish me and my seed forever, and let us not go astray henceforth and forever. And he said, shall I return to Ur of the Chaldees, who seek my face, so that I should return to them, or shall I dwell here in this place? Make the straight path prosper before you, in the hand of your servant, that he might serve, and do not let me walk in the error of my heart, O my God. And he finished talking and praying, and behold, the word of the Lord was sent to him, saying, come forth from your land and from your kin and from your father's house into the land which I will show you. And I shall establish you as a great and numerous people. And I shall bless you, and I shall make your name great. And you will be blessed in the land, and all of the nations of the earth will bless themselves by you. And whoever blesses you, I shall bless. And whoever curses you, I shall curse. And I shall be God for you and your son, and for the son of your son, and for all of your seed. Do not fear henceforth, and for all the generations of the earth, I am your God. So that's when he left to go to the land God told him to go to. Josephus stated that Abraham's belief system caused a tumult amongst the Chaldeans. Alright, so Abraham and all them folks that was with him gets up and heads out of Ur of the Chaldees. And his nephew Lot, his wife Sarah, and you know, Sarah was his half-sister. So Abraham didn't lie when he told them people, that's my sister. He was telling the truth. And they went to this place called Haran, which later on would figure in this story because that's where Isaac's wife would come from. But they stayed there for several years, but here's what happened while they was there. There was about 72 men, and ain't no telling how many kids and wives and stuff they had. When Abraham pulled up and left, they went with him. They're going, hey, you the man. And then he went into the land of Canaan, which was a very dangerous place to go, by the way. But God protected Abraham and all those that followed him because they had a little bit of Abraham in them. Yeah. And when he went to Canaan, he dwelt in the plain of Mamre. Evidently that was a really nice valley that was well watered, because he had to feed all those people. My gosh, you know what it took to feed all them people? They didn't have no grocery stores back then. Well, you know what I mean. Now Abraham lived in the land of Canaan for several years until a famine came up. And he had heard that things were good down in Egypt. So Abraham took everybody with him, and they all went down to Egypt, and they stayed there for several years. And what happened was that evidently Sarah, Abram's wife, was a very beautiful woman. She was his half-sister. And so Abraham and her made a deal that she was going to say that she was his sister. So when they got down to Egypt, Pharaoh got word of how beautiful Sarah was, and so he took her. A couple accounts says he took her by force. But anyway, that's when bad stuff started happening to Pharaoh, okay? I mean, there was all kinds of plagues and all kind of crazy stuff started happening, and it scared him to death. And it wasn't just him. It was the whole kingdom. And so some of Pharaoh's wise men came up to him and said, hey, it's the woman. So anyway, so Pharaoh went up to, in fact, another account had an angel appearing to Pharaoh and saying, hey, I'm fixing to kill all you people. So Pharaoh took her back, gave Abram a bunch of presents, and he said, hey, this is some more comments that Josephus made about Abraham. Still talking about while Abraham was in Egypt, because he was there for several years. And he was disposed to go down to them, both to partake of the plenty they enjoyed, and to become an auditor of their priests, and to know what they said concerning the gods, designing either to follow them if they had better notions than he, or to convert them into a better way, if his own notions proved the truest. Now, evidently, Abraham was a pretty intelligent man, and Pharaoh gave him leave to enter into the conversation with the most learned among the Egyptians, from which conversation his virtue and his reputation became more conspicuous than they had been before. For whereas the Egyptians were formerly addicted to different customs and despised one another's sacred and accustomed rites, and were very angry with one another on that account, Abraham conferred with each of them, and confuted their reasonings they made use of, every one for their own practices, demonstrating that such reasonings were vain and void of truth. Whereupon he was admired by them in those conferences as a very wise man, and one of great sagacity, when he discoursed on any subject he undertook, and this not only in understanding it, but in persuading other men to assent to him. He communicated to them arithmetic, and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abram came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, for that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt, and from thence to the Greeks also. And Josephus had some more things to say about Abraham. He was a person of great sagacity, both for understanding all things and persuading his hearers, and not mistaken in his opinions. For which reason he began to have higher notions of virtue than others had, and he determined to renew and to change the opinion all men happened then to have concerning God, for he was the first that ventured to publish this notion, that there was but one God, the creator of the universe, and that as to other gods, if they contributed anything to the happiness of men, that each of them afforded it only according to his appointment, and not by their own power. This his opinion was derived from the irregular phenomena that were visible both at land and sea, as well as those that happened to the sun and the moon, and all the heavenly bodies. Thus, said he, these bodies had power of their own, they would certainly take care of their own regular motions. But since they do not preserve such regularity, they make it plain that insofar as they cooperate to our advantage, they do it not of their own abilities, but as they are subservient to him that commands them, to whom alone we ought justly to offer our honor and thanksgiving. For which doctrines, when the Chaldeans and other people of Mesopotamia raised a tumult against him, he thought fit to leave that country, and at the command and by the assistance of God, he came and lived in the land of Canaan. And when he was there settled, he built an altar and performed a sacrifice to God. Now, then Josephus goes on to name some other historians that commented about Abraham. Barosius mentions our father Abraham without naming him when he says thus, in the 10th generation after the flood, there was among the Chaldeans a man righteous and great, and skillful in celestial science. The Chaldeans were supposedly famous for that kind of knowledge. And then there's, but he says, but Hecataeus does more than barely mention him, for he composed and left behind him a book concerning him. And Nicholas of Damascus, in the 4th book of his history, says thus, Abram reigned at Damascus, being a foreigner, who came with an army out of the land above Babylon, called the land of the Chaldeans. Now the name of Abram is even still famous in the country of Damascus, and there is shown a village named from him, the habitation of Abram. Well, Abraham left Egypt and went back to the land of Canaan. And by this time, the possessions of Abraham and Lot were like huge. And so the herdsmen and the people that were with Lot started having some quarrels with Abraham's people. I think it was Philo of Alexandria. I'll tell you about that. Now here's Philo of Alexandria's description of Lot. For there was his brother's son, when he departed from his country, who went forth with him, an inconstant, variable, whimsical man, inclining now to one side and now to another, and at one time caressing him with friendly salutations, and at another being restive and obstinate by reason of the inequality of his disposition. On which account his household was also a quarrelsome and turbulent one, as it had no one to correct it. And especially his shepherds were so, because they were removed to a great distance from their master. Accordingly, they, in their self-willed manner, behaving as if they claimed complete liberty, were always quarreling with the managers of the flocks of the wise Abraham, who yielded a great many points because of the gentle disposition of their master. In consequence of which the shepherds of his nephew turned a folly into shameless audacity, and gave way to anger, cherishing ill temper, and exciting a spirit of irreconcilable enmity in their hearts, until they compel those whom they injure to turn to their own defense. And when a somewhat violent battle had taken place, the good Abraham, hearing of the attack made by his servants on the others, though only in self-defense, and knowing as he did that his own household was superior both in numbers and in power, would not allow the contest to be protracted till victory declared for his party, in order that he might not grieve his nephew by the defeat of his men. But standing between the two bodies of combatants, he by his pacific speeches reconciled the contending parties, and that not only for the moment, but for all future time too. Yeah, Abraham broke up the hassle.
But anyway, Abraham said, hey, pick out any place you want to go, and you get first pick. That's how sagacious he was. And but Abraham went back to Mamre and stayed there many years. And Lot, he went to the plain of Jordan and rented a motel room in Sodom. Oh, you know where that's going.
Now the daughter of Pharaoh that Pharaoh sent with Abraham and Sarah, her name was Hagar. And God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be like the sand of the sea. But Sarah had never had a baby yet. She had never gotten pregnant. So Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham. Okay? And so Hagar had a son by him. And later on, this caused some problems in the family. And she started acting, once she got pregnant, boy, she got uppity, and so Sarah didn't like it. So the tension became so great that she runs off. And so an angel appeared to her and said, hey, if you keep going like this, you're going to die. So he talks her into going back. And she did, and she had a son named Ishmael. And it would be about 13, 14 years before Isaac would be born. Now here's what Philo of Alexandria had to say about Abraham. We must investigate Abraham's skill and wisdom as displayed towards his fellow men, for it belongs to the same character to be pious toward God and affectionate towards man. And both these qualities of holiness towards God and justice towards man are commonly seen in the same individual. Abraham, being rich above most men in abundance of gold and silver, and having numerous herds of cattle and flocks of sheep, and being equal in his affluence and abundance to any men of the country, or of the original inhabitants, who were the most wealthy, and being in fact richer than any sojourner could be expected to be, was never unpopular with any of the people among whom he was dwelling, but was continually praised and beloved by all who had any acquaintance with him. And he also said, therefore the virtuous man, Abram, was not only peaceful and a lover of justice, but also a man of courage and of a warlike disposition, not for the sake of making war. The Jasher account, and I think even the Bible mentions this, that that Sodom and Gomorrah and those cities had been conquered by one of the kings from the east, all right, Chedorlaomer or something like that. And that I guess for a while they paid tribute to this king. Well, after so many years, they quit doing it. So this king got up a big army and came and captured all of Sodom, I guess in Gomorrah and all those little towns around there, and hauled them off. And Lot was with them. Now, one of the people escaped and came and told Abraham what the deal was, what happened. So Abram, with about 300 men, those people that were with him, and some of the friends around him who respected him, they went and attacked this army at night and beat the crap out of them. I'm sure that God was with them, okay? But Abraham was a brave man, you know. Thousands of people in this army and 300 guys kicked their butts and took all the stuff back. And while they were coming back, called him the king of Salem, Adonizak, Melchizedek, all right? This was what later would become Jerusalem. This was Salem back then. And that this Melchizedek guy came out, and Josephus said he was happy. You'd have thought he won the battle himself, all right? And so Abraham gave him a tenth of all the stuff that they had gotten from this army. And that was a tithe, okay? Now, why would he give him that, you know? Abraham wasn't a religious man. The book of Jasher throws in a clue that this Melchizedek guy was really Shem, who had taught Abraham. And supposedly that's who you're supposed to tithe to, the one who taught you. So the king of Sodom comes up and says, hey, you can have all this stuff. I just want the people. And Abraham said, now I ain't taking a shoestring from you, lest you say that you made me rich. So Abraham, he had a lot of principles.
You know, looking back, you had to have been crazy or just plain ignorant to mess with Abraham. God's man, yeah, no kidding.
I guess it was 12, 13 years after Ishmael was born. The story goes that there were some 3 men that were really angels that came by and visited Abraham. So Abraham, who was real generous and a great host, invited them to eat and sit down under this big tree and rest themselves. And I won't go into it too deep, but here's where Abraham finds out that they're going to destroy Sodom. Now, and then Abraham goes through this deal, well, what if there's 50 good men there, you know? And he said, no, I won't destroy it if there's 50 good men. Well, anyway, Abraham jewed him down to 5 or 10 or something like that. And he said, hey, if there was 10 good people, I wouldn't destroy it. So evidently there wasn't that many good people. So, and then they announced to Abraham that Sarah's going to have a baby. And she's 100 years old.
Oops, Sarah was only 90 years old.
And so she kind of overhears this, and she starts laughing. And so one of these angels goes, hey, what'd you laugh for? She said, I didn't laugh. He said, you did too. But anyway, the child that would be born, they say here, Isaac means laughter. I like laughter too, you know. But anyway, and so the 2 of these angels go to, you know, destroy Sodom. But they're going to pull Lot out, all right? And for the sake of Abraham. Well, here's the deal about Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? You know, most of the stuff you hear about these places is that they were sexually immoral, that they were, you know, sins of the flesh, okay? That they were sodomites and stuff like that. Well, that wasn't all there was to it. I mean, I guess that was a big deal. There's a story in Jasher that 4 times a year that the people of Sodom would go to this place where I guess it was real pretty and they had springs of water and everything, and that everybody would have sexual intercourse with anybody they wanted to. And they'd do it all day. They'd do that 4 times a year. Wife swapping, kid swapping, all kinds of stuff. But that wasn't the only thing, all right? The people of Sodom were cruel. And the book of Jasher tells stories about how they took advantage of strangers, how they would rob poor people. They'd let people starve to death in the street, you know, just stuff like that, you know. So there was a lot more to it than just sexual sins. Now, when these angels get to Sodom, the people of Sodom tried to sexually assault them. And so Lot, you know, they went to Lot's house, and these people were beating on the door, and Lot offers him his daughters, and no, that wasn't going to be good enough. So these angels blinded all the people outside, and they said, Lot, you got to get out of here. God's going to destroy this whole place. So evidently some of Lot's family stayed there, but 2 of his daughters and his wife went with him, and their husbands wouldn't go. So while they're going, they say, don't look back. Now, we don't know if that means just look back or go back. But either way it was, Lot's wife didn't make it. Said she got turned into a pillar of salt. And I guess Lot lost just about everything except his 2 daughters.
Now, Abraham moved to Gerar in the land of the Philistines. And what happened next was kind of a repeat of what happened with Pharaoh in Egypt. Abimelech was the king of the Philistines, and of course he got wind of Sarah and pulled the same deal that Pharaoh did. And so anyway, the story goes that Abimelech fell asleep on his throne one night, and he had this terrifying dream where this angel with a sword came up and said, "You're a dead man." And not only that, but the way it's worded in the story was that all the wombs were closed up, and something about issues. Now, I don't know if everybody got diarrhea or everybody got constipated or something, but anyway, it really caused an uproar in the land of the Philistines. So anyway, same thing happened. Abimelech came up to Abraham and goes, "Hey man, here's some presents." And you can live anywhere you want to, you and your crowd here, okay? So I guess they became friends, or at least Abimelech was scared to death to mess with Abraham because God was with him. And but anyway, Abraham prayed for Abimelech and the Philistines, and they all got well. So anyway, that was a pretty powerful statement there.
The book of Genesis records that when Abram was 90 years old, that the Lord appeared to him. And it's here where he tells him that he will no longer be called Abram, but Abraham, father of nations. And he says, "And I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations out of you, and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you, and their generations for an everlasting covenant. And he says, I will give unto you and to your seed the land where you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And he said unto Abraham, you shall keep my covenant, you and your seed after you and their generations." And this is where God says that this will be a token between us. " . You will circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it will be a covenant between us. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man in your generations. And then Abraham and all the men and the kids got circumcised. You know, that's not as much fun when you get old. I bet that hurt. And anyway,
Ishmael was about 13 when he was circumcised. Josephus claimed that in his day and age that the Arabians still waited till a young man was 13 years old before they went through this rite of circumcision. If you read up on it, there's still some cultures that wait that long. But the Jewish culture, they still do it at 8 days old. Now the story goes that the day that, or the time when Isaac was weaned, that Abraham threw a great big feast. And Shem and Eber, who were still alive, came. And Abimelech and Phicol, his captain of his army, and that Terah, who was Abraham's father, and Nahor, his brother, came, and they had a big to-do about Isaac. The story goes that Ishmael became an archer, bows and arrows, and that when Isaac was about 5 years old and Ishmael was about 19 or 20, that Ishmael drew his bow and pointed his bow and arrow at Isaac. Sarah freaked out about this, went up to Abraham and goes, okay, they've got to go. All right. So anyway, that's when Ishmael and his mother were sent to another place. But I'm sure, the story goes that Abraham gave him money and cattle and, all kinds of stuff. And he sent Ishmael away, which I think was a good idea. You don't point no bow and arrow at somebody like that, unless there's something wrong with you.
Abraham evidently spent many years there living in around where the Philistines were. But after that, he went to a place called Beersheba, and he dug a well there. And evidently, some of the Philistines came and stole the well from Abraham. So anyway, Abimelech came up, and Abraham said, hey, what's the deal? And so Abimelech said, hey, I didn't hear about it till right now. So anyway, they exchanged some gifts, and they made a covenant with each other, and they called the name of the place Beersheba, which means the well of the covenant. And then I'll just read here. And Abraham planted a large grove in Beersheba, and he made to it 4 gates facing the 4 sides of the earth. And he planted a vineyard in it, so that if a traveler came to Abraham, he entered any gate which was in the road, and remained there and ate and drank and satisfied himself, and then departed. For the house of Abraham was always open to the sons of men that passed and repassed, who came daily to eat and drink in the house of Abraham. And any man who had hunger and came to Abraham's house, Abraham would give him bread that he might eat and drink and be satisfied. And anyone that came naked to his house, he would clothe with garments as he might choose, and give him silver and gold, and make known to him the Lord who had created him in the earth. This did Abraham all his life. Abraham became world famous, all right, because of his generosity, because of his sagacity, because of his wisdom, because of his intelligence. He was a true man of God, and he didn't need no religion, It was him and God.
Hey, I'm not here to tell you the whole story of Abraham. I'm here to fill in some of the blanks. And one of the most puzzling stories about Abraham was this deal about God told him to go sacrifice Isaac. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? Let's back up a minute.
What got this all started, according to the Jasher count, has it where Ishmael and Isaac are together. And, Ishmael was older than Isaac. And so Ishmael boasted of himself to Isaac, saying, I was 13 years old when the Lord spoke to my father to circumcise us. And I did according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to my father. And I gave my soul unto the Lord, and I did not transgress his words, which he commanded my father. And so Isaac comes back. He says, why do you boast to me about this, about a little bit of flesh, which you did take from your body, concerning which the Lord commanded you? As the Lord lives, the God of my father Abraham, if the Lord should say unto my father, take now thy son Isaac, and bring him up an offering before me, I would not refrain, but I would joyfully accede to it. And the Lord heard the word that Isaac spoke to Ishmael, and it seemed good in the sight of the Lord. And he thought to try Abraham in this matter. The plot thickens.
Okay, you ever read the book of Job? Are you familiar with that story? I mean, it's fantastical. But there's been a whole lot of people that have gone through a whole lot of trials and tribulations, and that, that story of Job inspired them to hang on. Well, anyway, the book of Jasher has some information about that story that that kind of ties Job and Abraham in together. And here's the way it goes. You remember in the book of Job where, Satan, God says, hey, Satan, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing this and that. And God starts bragging on Job. Well, the way the book of Jasher describes it, it's the same kind of deal, God starts bragging on Abraham. And if God starts bragging on you, you better gird your loins. So anyway, go read it for yourself, but I'll just kind of go over the highlights of it. After God starts bragging on Abraham, Satan says, well, yeah, he came there and he has this son and he hadn't sacrificed to you in, well, how long's it been, 20 years or something like that. Like that's a big deal. So God says, well, hey, you know what, Satan? Abraham is so cool. If I ask him to sacrifice his son Isaac, whom he loves, he'd do it. Well, anyway. Of course, if you've read the story, you know what happens next, okay? Yeah. God commands Abraham to do that. He's testing him. And so, what the book of Genesis doesn't tell you, I think the book of Genesis says, like, they took a couple of it was Isaac and Abraham and a couple of young men. Well, you know who them young men were? Well, according to the Jasher account, it was Ishmael and Eliezer. And you know what they were thinking? Oh boy, Isaac's gonna get killed and then I get it all. Yeah, it was something like that, all right? And along the way to this Mount Moriah where they were going, Satan was trying to hedge his bets. I mean, he appeared to Abraham and said, wait, what are you? You some kind of idiot or something? And to Isaac, some young guy, what's the matter with you? But it didn't work. All right? And if you follow the story, there was just stuff going on all along the way there. And then, it gets down to where the Genesis account has Isaac asking Abraham, where is the sacrifice, Father? Abraham replies, the Lord will provide himself a sacrifice. Which not only in that case came to pass, but bespoke of the death of Jesus on the cross. Well, in Jasher, there's a conversation between Abram and Isaac. And Isaac knew what was going to happen. And he going, I'm all for it. Do what you got to do, Dad. If God told you to do that, do it. Wow. Well, of course, you know that an angel from heaven came and said, don't do it. I like you, Abraham. You're my kind of guy. But the ram, Abraham looked up and there was a ram. Well, that ram was supposed to just walk right on up. But Satan got him caught up in them bushes. Have you ever had an experience in life like that where, everything's going just fine and then, your ram gets caught in the bushes or something? Yeah, me too. But anyway, just filling in some more blanks in this story about Abraham.
It wasn't long after this that Sarah died. She was 127 years old. And after this, Abraham married a woman named Keturah, and she had 6 sons with him. Josephus states that these sons were both courageous and sagacious men, and that Abraham contrived to send them out in colonies, and that one of these sons, Aphor, that's who Africa is named after. From Isaac, Ishmael, and these other 6 sons, there are millions of descendants to this day. Now, after Sarah died, Abraham sent Isaac to the house of Shem and Eber so that they'd teach him about the Lord, just like he did when he was younger, and because they were still alive. And after that, Isaac lived with Abraham for many years, and Jacob and Esau came along. And the Jasher account states that Abraham loved Jacob, and that Isaac loved Esau. And the night that Abraham died, the Jasher account says that Jacob was 15 years old, and that he had his head on Abraham's chest, and when he woke up in the morning, that Abraham was dead. Abraham lived to be 175 years old. He was a great man.
I'm not talking sour grapes about the Bible or nothing, but there's some real juicy, inspiring, interesting information in some of these other accounts. Wouldn't you agree? The stories about this man's courage, his generosity, his intelligence, his loyalty and faith in God, it meant a lot to me. I may not be genetically one of his descendants, but mentally speaking, I'm one of his ancestors. I hope to meet this man someday. How about you?